map. Looking. Another 30 seconds. This lays out where the 12 tribes were located. Lays out the time of the 12 tribes also, the cities and so forth. I think this will be better understood. The title of today's sermon is God's Wonder Woman. God's Wonder Woman. One of the top movies last year was the same title, except without gods in it, was Wonder Woman. It was starring Gal Gadot, and many in the world complained because she was from Israel. She was Miss Israel when she was 18 or 19 years old in some beauty pageant. They complained because they thought that such a strong woman shouldn't be portrayed by a Jew. Well, she is of mixed heritage, but part of it is Israel. And I want to show just a clip of that now. So you, for those who didn't see that, can kind of have an idea of what it was. Movie. It was one of the top grossing movies of last year. Is it fantasy? Yes. But many women felt empowered by the portrayal of this.
I had no father. I was brought to life by Zeus. The gods made the Amazons to restore peace to the world. And it's what I'm going to do.
Well, that's neat. Welcome to Jolly Old London.
It's hideous.
Yeah, it's not for everybody. Stay back. Or maybe not. Who's this woman?
You will soon find out.
Yep, that's not gonna work. Please put the sword down.
It doesn't go with the outfit.
At all.
Wonder Woman, rated PG-13, experience.
It was a definite fantasy put on by Hollywood, but it portrayed a woman of power, of strength, of brawn, but also of brains. And the Bible is full of determined women leaders. Women of also beauty and brains. But sometimes they get overlooked. Sometimes we look at the certain men and strength, and when you think of the book of Judges, you will think of Samson. Sometimes Gideon and various judges that came forth. But in the book of Judges, in that period of time, there is the inspiring story of a woman who God called to lead and to judge all the tribes of Israel, above and beyond any man at that time. We see in the Bible the story of Esther, Ruth, Hannah, and Sarah, but also we see the story of Deborah. The story of Deborah that can sometimes be overlooked. Her story is basically covered in one chapter, Judges chapter 4. And the lack of words there are given to us and expounded for us in chapter 5. I want to look at that today. But before we dive into this incredible epic story and to truly appreciate the epic story that it is, I want to give you some background so that you can not only understand the background of what's going on, but also the history. Because it's very important for us when we read something in the Bible that we understand why God put it in there, what's in it for us, and how we need to be able to retell the story. So that we have more understanding than making it just like a movie picture. That we understand that this was a real Wonder Woman. This was a woman who had so many attributes that she's the only female judge listed in the Bible. And I would like to lay this out because in our story, if you will turn to the book of Judges, I will be reading from the New Living Translation today. We come to the second chapter of Judges, and we are at the point in time where Joshua has died. And God then has left judges to rule over Israel. But they have gone into this land, the promised land. But things didn't work out quite like God had planned. It wasn't God's plan that fell through. It was the people who did not enact the plan. So if you will, I'd like you to go with me to Judges 2. And I'll read verse 18 here, 18 and 19. So we look at this time whenever the Lord raised up a judge over Israel, He said with that judge and rescued the people from their enemies throughout the judge's lifetime. For the Lord took pity on the people who were burdened by oppression and suffering. But when the judge died, the people returned to their corrupt ways, behaving worse than those who had lived before them. They went after other gods, serving and worshiping them. And they refused to give up their evil practices and their stubborn ways. So what did He tell them? Well, if you will, go back to Deuteronomy 7. Deuteronomy 7, he lays it all out in 6 verses before they ever come to the promised land. This is what He told them as they were about to enter the promised land. Chapter 7, verse 1. When the Lord your God brings you into the land you are about to enter and occupy, He will clear away many nations ahead of you. The Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, Canaanites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. These 7 nations are greater and more numerous than you. When the Lord your God hands these, who hands them? The Lord God hands them. Hands these nations over to you, and you conquer them, you must completely destroy them. Make no treaties with them, and show no mercy. You must not intermarry with them. Do not let your daughters and your sons marry their sons and daughters, for they will lead your children away from me and to worship other gods. Then the anger of the Lord will burn against you, and He will quickly destroy you. This is what you must do. You must break down the pagan altars and shatter their sacred pillars. Cut down their Asherah poles and burn their idols. For you are a holy people who belong to the Lord your God. Of all people on earth, the Lord your God has chosen you to be His own special treasure. Wow. Pretty unique, huh? So, what happened? Well, Go with me to chapter 3 of Judges. Chapter 3 of Judges, starting in verse 5. So the people of Israel lived among the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, Perizzites, Hivites, and Jebusites. And they intermarried with them. Israelites' sons married their daughters. And Israelites' daughters were given in marriage to their sons. And the Israelites served their gods. The Israelites did evil in the sight of the Lord. They forgot about the Lord their God, and they served the images of Baal and the Asherah poles. He said, don't do this. And what did they do? They went and did it. Kind of reminds you of when you were a kid. You say, don't go out into the yard. As soon as your parents are looking the other way, you run out into the yard. And parents said, I told you not to do that. And then you do it again. So someone has to be disciplined. And God's the same way with His children. So, this is what happened. For 8 years they were in slavery. He told them to get rid, and then there wouldn't have been the problem. But did they? You don't have to turn there, but in chapter 2, he gives a history here. He told them when you go in and each, you can look down here of the land that was assigned to each of the tribes. And it was, the promise is great land. But he said, get rid of these people. I've promised that to you. And if you'll go in and fight and do what I tell you, I will back you. And I will cast them out before you. And some of the nations did. Some of the tribes did. But others didn't. And it talks about those that did. And then I looked over here in verse 27 of chapter 1. The tribe of Manasseh failed to drive out the people. 29, the people of Ephraim failed to drive out the Canaanites. 30, the tribe of Zebulun failed to drive out the residents. The tribe of Asher failed to drive out the residents. They did not do it. There were some who did. Caleb. And Caleb was assigned the land of the giants. Anak. He drove the giants out, showing it could be done. He did his part. But others, it's kind of maybe more trouble than what it's worth, and you know, they've been there for a while, came up with a lot of excuses. They did not do it. So it caused problems, and God allowed the other kings that were there, of all the Canaanites, Hittites, Moabites, and all those to reign over them. Because they turned their back on Him. But they cried out after 8 years, and God said, okay, I'm going to deliver you. And so He sent a judge. And that judge's name was Othniel. Othniel. And Othniel was the nephew of Caleb. He knew a little something about driving people out and fighting and getting things done. And Othniel gave the people freedom. And he was their judge. And he was a righteous judge. And the people had peace for 40 years during his time. It was a long time to have peace. But what happened? After Othniel died, the people turned back and started just working with the other people who were there, doing what God told them not to do. And they became just like they were before. And God allowed them to become slaves again. And this time, you would think they would learn their lesson. Just kind of remind you of their fathers and grandfathers who were in the promised land. Who were going to the promised land. They were in the wilderness for 40 years. They just kept, they do right and they do wrong. Do right, do wrong. And so God allowed them to be slaves for 18 years. Not just 8 years, but 18 years. And they were oppressed. And they cried out to God again. This time, He gave them a judge by the name of Ehud. Ehud. E-H-U-D. Ehud. And he got them their freedom. And they had peace for 80 years. 80 years over this whole territory that you're looking at on your page. 80 years you would have. But after he died, after Ehud died, they went back to their evil ways again. And God allowed them to be slaves. Which brings us up to the point in time of Deborah. Because at the time that we come to in Judges 4, verse 1, it says, after Ehud's death, the Israelites again did evil in the sight of the Lord. So the Lord turned them over to King Jabin of Hazor, a Canaanite king. And they were slaves for 20 years. That's a long time. As you can see, God is patient. First there were 8 years and they cried out to Him, and then they didn't learn anything, so then there was 18 years. Now we have 20 years. And they're crying out to God. Deborah enters our story as the hero. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Why did God choose her? Don't know. Bible doesn't say. Did she possess some incredible wisdom that others did not have? Don't know. Did she prophesy? The name of her husband meant torches or light. It could mean a woman of torches or a fiery woman. Maybe she had the personality. She had the drive. The one thing we did know, she had a relationship with God. Which, if you want to be a woman of God, you better have a relationship with God. You want to be empowered by God, you need to have a relationship with God. And look towards Him. And know that He is leading and guiding your life. It's also that way for men also. But here we have the story of an incredible woman. I want to say she filled a vacuum left by men. The lack of leadership. As chapter 5 and verse 7 says, the whole nation, all the nations here, later considered her the mother of Israel. I don't know about you, but I had an incredible, still do have an incredible mother. And she guided me and would lay down the law when the law needed to be laid down. Show compassion when compassion needed to be dished out. But we really don't know much about Deborah's past. Then she was married. But she was not only a leader, but as we can see from the story, she's a motivator. Be a great motivational speaker, a counselor, and a all-out hero. Now, before we go into this story, I would like you to look at your book. Because there's something very, very important that you need to know about this map. And for us to truly understand, I want to give you the background. Because then this chapter is not very long. It doesn't take long to read it. But it brings new meaning when you understand the territory. I ran into somebody a few weeks ago in my work that was from Trinidad. And I said, well, I go there every so often. Try to go there a couple times a year, 3 times a year. Been there quite a few times. Tobago, we were talking, okay? And I said, we have a church there. He goes, where's your church? And I said, in Chaguanas. Oh man, he said, my uncle lives in Chaguanas. Montrose Plaza, 2 streets behind. So he knew exactly where the church was. I gave him my card. I said, if you want to come sometime. He said, well, I might do that. What time is your Sunday service? I said, well, you can go there anytime you want on Sunday, but nobody will be there. But Sabbath, Saturday. Oh, okay. Well, that kind of shortened the conversation, I think. But he understood and what I was talking about because he knew the layout of the land. Today I want you to have a layout of the land so that you can understand the story, not only to be able to tell it and to teach it in the same way, but it will help you understand later on when you read different parts of the Bible where these things take place. So I gave all of you a handout, and I have one right in front of us here as I'll be bringing this around that I kind of want you to see. I don't know if you can see it, hopefully all of you can, right here. But it's important to know that the Promised Land was a valuable land. As you know, at the very south where they came from was Egypt. And you're looking at the Mediterranean Sea right here. It's called the Great Sea. And on my map, in case you want to draw one there, you can see this yellow line. This yellow line goes all the way to Egypt and comes all the way up along the coast till it gets to Megiddo. That's why I have that yellow line. That was a major highway called the Way of the Sea. It was a road, a highway that was made and laid out for hundreds of years for all the trade that came from Egypt, so they could come and dock over here, or they could bring their crops, bring all the various things that they wanted up here to where modern-day Turkey is, or all to the other nations, even to India, would come up through here. And of course, all the trading that came from the north all used this road so they didn't have to go through the desert. And they would take the Way of the Sea. And as you can see, this road branched up here when it got to Megiddo. It came up and went to Aram, or it came up here and went up the coast. This was a major, major highway. It was the highway that would make Solomon so wealthy, as all the goods were transported all through this land. So whoever controlled the highway had all the money, because they could either tax you or they could rob you and take a certain amount of your goods. Kind of like when I ship something over to Haiti, not knowing what the unforeseen tax of some agent decides to take a box out. That's the way it was. But here, the kings actually wanted to control this area. And that's what our king at this time, King Jabin, controls this whole area with his general at the time called Sisera. And so if the tribes wanted to ship sheep, goats, all their grain, you could. It was hard to go through the mountains. But if you could go over to the highway, there was a main highway there, so you could ship whatever you wanted. And all the tribes could then come together and trade and work these things out and become wealthy, as we later saw at the time of David and Solomon. So I wanted you to see those roads here. Now, that's so important. So let's go to our story now in chapter 4. As I read verse 1, thank you, sir. Read verse 1, At Ehud's death, the Israelites again did evil in the sight. So the Lord turned them over to King Jabin of Hazor. Okay, you see up towards the top, if you look up here, okay, where's Hazor? You see it? It's in Naphtali. That's where the king's palace was. That's where the king operated out of. Okay? So you might even want to circle that little area there of Hazor. Okay? And he was a Canaanite king. The commander of his army was, as verse 2 says, Sisera, who lived in Haggasheth-Haggaiah. Where is that? Okay? If you look over near the coast, just up from Megiddo, if you look up from the coast, you'll see a city named Jokneam. Okay? It's south of the Kishon River. If you go right over that river, this is where Sisera lived, in Haggasheth-Haggaiah. Okay? That's where he kept a big part of King Jabin's army. Now, why did they stay there? It's because if you look at this and you watch this road, right at Megiddo is where the road split. So this is where anybody from Egypt or even Africa would come up with goods and try to come up there. When they got there, they would split at Megiddo because the road split and they could go either way. So this Sisera lived just above the Kishon River, but he patrolled at his city there. He came over the Kishon River and controlled that way of the sea. So he got anybody who was coming from the north in two directions, and he got everybody coming from the south in one. So he controlled that whole thing. And what did it mean? It meant a lot of money. It meant a lot of power. So nobody did anything unless he let them do it. And he was very powerful. He said Sisera, who had 900 chariots, that's just men on chariots alone. That doesn't take into account the thousands upon thousands upon thousands and tens of thousands of men that were also part of the army on foot. He ruthlessly oppressed the Israelites for 20 years. How did he ruthlessly oppress them? He'd take whatever he wanted. They knew they had to go down this road to be able to travel or go even across the, if they were trying to cross the mountains and do this kind of stuff, they were easy pickings for his cavalry that ran around, making sure the back roads were covered. So they would just ship their grain. He would say, I'll take half of that, and just take it. He said, then the people of Israel cried out to the Lord for help. And then it says in verse 4, Deborah, the wife of Lapidoth, was a prophet. She was a prophetess, or a prophet, who was judging Israel at the time. So she had the highest position in all of Israel at the time. She would sit under the palm of Deborah between where? Ramah and Bethel. Look down there at Ephraim. You see Ephraim and you see Bethel? Even on your map it says Deborah. She would sit under a palm tree, a large palm tree. And that's where people would come to hear her judgment. Oh, I have a problem with this, or I have this, I need you to know what to do. Wait a minute, these two families are fighting and they need a decision, so they would come to Deborah. And she would sit under what later became known the palm of Deborah. So, you can see where it's at in Ephraim. And it said that Israelites would go to her for judgment. Look at your map at the bottom. As you can see that about 2 inches, a 2.5 inch measurement on there is 40 miles. Now look at how much territory that's covered. So people that were in the very south at Simeon, people in the very north at Naphtali, Asher, they had a long way to go to come to Deborah to get a judgment. This is going to take a long time. But they came because of her wisdom. In the hill country of Ephraim, the Israelites go for her judgment. In verse 6, one day she sent for Barak, son of Abinoam, who lived in Kadesh in the land of Naphtali. You see that up there? See where Naphtali is? You see where Kadesh is. That's where Barak was living, situated at the time. And so she sent for him. He had a long way to travel, didn't he? To go down, because and he's going to say, well, wait a minute, if that woman wants to see me, she ought to come up here. Sorry, it didn't work that way. God's prophet, man or woman, says, do something. You did. And so Barak came all that way to come and to see her. And she said to him, this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, commands you. Call out 10,000 warriors from the tribes of Naphtali and Zebulun and bring them to Mount Tabor. You see where Mount Tabor is there? Look down and you'll see. Okay. Mount Tabor is just north of the valley of Jezreel, or the Kishon River. So he was to collect the men, the warriors, from Naphtali, you see that area up there, and Zebulun, and bring 10,000 men to Mount Tabor and meet on the top of Mount Tabor. And as it says, Mount Tabor is almost 2,000 feet high. So they were to gather there and bring those men. And I will call out Sisera, commander of Jabin's army, along with his chariots and warriors, to the Kishon River. That's where you see that Kishon River that runs through the Jezreel Valley. Except the water, as you would think, well, wait a minute, the water runs north to south. No, it didn't. The water came off of Mount Tabor and came into the valley of Jezreel and formed a river and goes out and feeds into the Mediterranean Sea. But there's one thing that you need, that you have to understand for this story. If you go to the Jezreel Valley today and you say, well, I'd like to walk in the Kishon River, you're not going to be able to do it. The water doesn't flow except in the rainy seasons. It's just flat land. But there's so much rain comes and hits Mount Tabor and all the area that the streams, they all feed this whole valley, and then the water runs out. When it is the wet season, the fall, or even the spring as it is there, and the heavy rains come, this land that you can walk across and it becomes just this valley gets 20 to 30 and sometimes even 40 foot deep. And it is not only a river, a raging, powerful river that is too dangerous to even try to go near it at the time. I give you that because of the story that's going to take place. Because as we read the Kishon River, God says, I will call them. There I will give you victory over him. In verse 8, Barak says, I will go, but only if you go with me. How disappointing for Deborah. She not only has the judgment of the entire 12 tribes upon her, and she has to answer this and take care of this. God tells her to call this Barak and let's go. He can lead the army. gets there, and what does he say? After you, dear. Think he wanted to hear that? Barak didn't have at the time. Which makes you wonder, wait a minute, if he'd have said, yeah, let's go, if they'd have even need Deborah as a judge. Talk about a strong woman. What did she say? She said, very well, she replied. I will go with you, but you will receive no honor in this venture. For the Lord's victory over Sisera will be at the hands of a woman. Laying it out to him. You didn't hear him go, okay, that's okay, I'll do it. No, he didn't do it. Was he as close to God as Deborah? Obviously not. Did he have the faith that Deborah had? No, obviously not, because God would have been talking to him, but he was talking to her, didn't he? So Deborah went with Barak to Kadesh. Where's Kadesh? Remember up there? Near where Barak's from? So she's having to travel. He came down, okay, I'll do this. And then she has to travel with him all the way up there to Naphtali, which is at Kadesh, which is just north of Hazor, which is where the King Jabin runs. At Kadesh, Barak called together the tribes of Zebulun and Naphtali. You see them there, so they are come. And 10,000 warriors went up with him, and Deborah also went with him. 10,000 men. In the United States Army, that's called a division. If you saw a division come out where they're all marching together, 10,000 men, pretty impressive. That's a lot of men. So you'd say, okay, where are you 10,000 men going? Wherever Deborah tells us to go. She had to be quite a leader, didn't she? You know, we do see men today go, I'm not following that. Oh, yeah, hey, well, I'm going to... No, all of them followed. Wherever she told you to go. It's kind of like when Mary tells me dinner's served, I said, where? I'll go wherever she tells me to go. I want dinner. So she's telling him this. And then it breaks up the story and tells a man by the name of Eber. Eber. And verse 11 says, now Eber the Kenite, a descendant of Moses' brother-in-law Hobab, had moved away from the other members of his tribe and pitched his tent by the oak of Zananim near Kadesh. So here is this Bedouin, as you might say. They live in tents. They never stay in the same place, and they're Kenites. And they have been, they came up from near Mount Sinai, and they're just following and they kind of just live off the land, and they live off the people. And the one thing that the Kenites got along with is they try to just placate or get along with whoever's in charge. That way they don't ruffle any feathers. They didn't really have any definite religious. They just like, okay, you say that's over there. You say you're in charge? You betcha. Here's some tribute. Oh, you're in charge. Here you go. Just let us live in our tents. We'll be fine. So they're living up in that area near Hazor and Kadesh. And then verse 12, it said, when Sisera was told that Barak, son of Abinoam, which he knew, had gone up to Mount Tabor, because everybody's going to be saying, whoa, 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 hey, do you know it's 10,000, you moved 10,000 men, guess what? Everybody's going to know it. And you're bringing 10,000 men up to Mount Tabor? Bringing the water alone and the food would be a lot. But they're having to come up here and meet. So, old Sisera, he knows what's going on. And he called for all 900 of his iron chariots and all of his warriors, and they marched from Hagosheth-Haggoyim to the Kishon Valley. part of the Kishon River, which is the valley of Jezreel. And so he moves, as you can see where he's at, he just follows the river, which is not really a river right now, and he goes down into the valley of Jezreel, the plain area there. Because he's got his chariots, and you can imagine trying to fight chariots. You're going to have a hard time. And he's got all of his men and soldiers there. And so here you have 10,000 men standing near the top of Mount Tabor, ready to go down to that valley to fight. And you would say, well, you know, 10,000 men are, that's pretty impressive military force. You have to understand, most historians will tell you, and even we can see the story tells us in chapter 5. What were they going down to fight with? Sticks and rocks. Sticks and rocks. See, they've been slaves. And at the time, all the historians say, they couldn't make metal, they couldn't do any of this stuff. They were slaves. They were not allowed to have any swords, any weapons, any spears, anything like this. It's how they kept them subservient. And so, can you see now? All this army that he had, the thousands and thousands of men that he had, plus the 900 chariots, they had swords, they had spears, they had slings, they had all the finest of armaments at that time. So they were saying, come on, you know, come on down off that mountain, you with your little sticks. And let's see how big you are. It kind of reminds you of Goliath. Or you say, what, you send a dog out to me? So they're looking and saying, this is going to be one big slaughter. Guys, you're going to have a fun day with this. Look at these men coming down that mountain with their little sticks. Now let me ask you this. Did the men have faith in Deborah? Would you? If a woman you've never met, you just heard about her before, comes up and stands before your army and says, okay, well, you got a few sticks, but you won't really need them. And you're going to go down, and there's going to be an army down there, one of the grandest armies at his time, and you're going to slaughter them. Would you go, oh, let me go first? No. It took incredible faith. Faith in her. Did they have faith in God? From the scriptures you don't see it. But they had faith in her because she had faith in God. Does that teach us a good lesson about the people in our lives? That need to see our faith in God? Maybe they don't have it, but they need to see it in us. Then Deborah, in verse 14, said to Barak, get ready. Get ready. This is the day of the Lord. We'll give you victory over Sisera, for the Lord is marching ahead of you. Those are powerful words. Can you imagine her saying it? You can see it, it's written in different ways in different translations. But she had to say to Barak, get ready! This is the day the Lord will give you victory over Sisera, for the Lord is marching ahead of you. Powerful speaker she must have been. She's firing him up. So Barak led his 10,000 warriors down the slopes of Mount Tabor into battle. When Barak attacked, the Lord, who? The Lord threw Sisera and his chariots and warriors into a panic. Why? Why? What panic? They're looking at people with sticks. They're an army and they're looking at these guys that they just gathered together that were farmers and raised crops and herdsmen. Panic. What could have happened? What could have happened? I'd like to tell you that there is a repeat of this story in history. Incredible parallel. In 1799, the French army came to this same valley, and they were attacked by an army 3 or 4 times, or they were being pursued by an army 3 or 4 times their size of Arabs. And we were going to drive the French out. And you can find this in the annals of history. It happened in April 6th, 1799, according to the French history books. And as the French army knew certain destruction, as they were crossing this Jezreel Valley, this incredible storm came through. Rain of biblical proportions came over the top of them as they were heading and trying to reach Mount Tabor, as they were fleeing from this Arab army 3 or 4 times their size. And just as they were getting there, all this, the streams coming off Mount Tabor and all the streams from everywhere around came into that valley of Jezreel and formed the Kishon River and wiped out the entire Arab army with such a flood that they all got caught up in it as they were trying to catch it at the same time. And it washed most of the Arabs straight into the Mediterranean Sea. Matter of history. Was it a repeat of what happens here? I don't know. Let's carry on the story. Let's finish the story. And let's find out. Because it said the Lord did it. They really didn't fight. Verse 15. When Barak attacked, the Lord threw Sisera and his chariots and warriors into a panic. Sisera leaped down from his chariot and escaped. Why would you leap? Why would you get off your chariot and run by foot? Yeah, if it wouldn't go, you're stuck in mud. Right? Otherwise, if I'm running from somebody and they say, oh, you want to run or you want a chariot? I'm going to take chariot every time, unless something's wrong. And so all of a sudden, if this thing becomes just mud and water, the chariot's not going to do you any good, is it? So he obviously knew that. And then Barak chased the chariots and the enemy army all the way to Hagosheth-Hagi, which was their home turf, which down by the Mediterranean Sea, killing all of Sisera's warriors, not a single one left alive. Meanwhile, Sisera ran to the tent of Jael, the wife of Eber, the Kenite, because Eber's family was on friendly terms with King Jabin of Hazor. Fits the profile, doesn't it? But do you think she knew what was going on? You think 10,000 men couldn't leave from that and she didn't say, uh-oh, okay. And all of a sudden, here is this king. And realize, she came up, he didn't run to Hazor, did he? He's running away, and he comes up to her tent near, where? Kadesh. She's up Kadesh. Why didn't he run to King Jabin's palace and city in Hazor? Well, would you like to meet a king and say, oh, we just wiped out the whole army? Wait a minute, you had all this and you let these peasants, these slaves, destroy my whole army? You see why maybe he didn't go to King Hazor? But he went up there, and so she had already heard, wow, because people would have been shouting and everything would have been, wow. So what did she do? Jael went out to meet Sisera and said to him, come into my tent, sir. Come in, don't be afraid. So she knew who he was. He had been over that territory for 20 years. I'm sure he extracted money from her too, the whole family. So he went into her tent and she covered him with a blanket. Please give me some water. I'm thirsty. So she gave him some milk from a leather bag and covered him up again. as the scriptures in the Hebrew, they say she gave him curds, she gave him like yogurt, she gave him, so she just didn't give him water he requested. He gave him milk, she gave him something to eat, she gave him treated him royally. Can you imagine running? Because if you look here, by the time you're there from where he ran, it's about 35 or 40 miles. And Barak's in pursuit. So he's having to run on foot. How tired are you going to be? How exhausted are you? And then you finally make it to where you think you're okay. Are you going to sleep? You bet you it's going to be all much want to sleep, plus you just got your belly full. You're like, oh. And so you feel this woman, she knows me, and she knows the king, so I'm safe here. So she gave him some milk from a leather bag and covered him. Stand at the door of the tent, he told her. I bet she's going, okay, you just tell me all you want. If anyone comes and asks you if there is anyone here, say no. I'd have been saying please, pretty please, anything. But when Sisera fell asleep from exhaustion, Jael quietly crept up to him with a hammer and a tent peg in her hand. Now you have to realize, laying these tents, I had a hammer, right? But I mean, here you had these either metal pegs, but a lot of times they were just wood pegs that you had to set the tent. A lot of times the women set up the tent, as the man would go and hunt for food and do other things. So she obviously knew how to use this hammer. Now most of us would say, I don't know, I've had to shoot an animal or two. Shoot a dog once, had to shoot cows and put them out of their misery. And I had a gun and put the gun right to their head as they're laying there and you kill them. That was never pleasant. Haunted me a day or two afterwards. Okay? Yes. But can you ladies imagine taking a hammer like this and taking a peg or a piece of wood, and as a man is laying here, because from the scene he's laying on his side. Now this is a military army. This is a soldier. This is a general. This is like a big shot that you have to know, if he sees or hears me in the middle of it, I'm one dead woman, right? Because he's used to killing people. So she takes this peg, and she would have had more like a stone hammer of some type. Might have been a wood with like a club. That's all they had, because they weren't allowed to have major tools at the time. She would have had either a metal or a wood peg, and she's having to size that up on his temple and drive all the way through his head. And it says it guns in one temple and out the other. Any women up to that? And Solomon Kerr says, yeah, bring him to give him to Tobago. So we're seeing the story of not only one strong woman, but another. Fearless, obviously. And when Sister, she quietly slept with a hammer and a tent peg in her hand. She then drove the tent peg through his temple into the ground, so he died. When Barak came looking for Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said, come, and I will show you the man you're looking for. So obviously she had heard that story. So he followed her into the tent and found Sisera lying there dead, with a tent peg through his temple. How do you think Barak was like, wow, whoa, this is a woman, Because here was the most fierce general in the whole area at the time, and this woman took him out. So on that day, Israel saw God defeat Jabin. Who defeated him? God did. The Canaanite king. And from that time on, Israel became stronger and stronger against King Jabin, until they finally destroyed him. This was the beginning of his defeat. And Barak, later we know, led that fight. And Barak's name, he obviously learned a lot from this woman, Deborah and Jael, because his name is listed in the 11th chapter of Hebrews. He will be in the kingdom of God, that someday we can actually talk to him and learn about this incredible story. So as I wrap this up, I want you to understand that this is 125 to 150 years before King David. This is about 150 years or so after they had entered the promised land. So this is about the middle of the ages of the judges. And we have this incredible story of the woman judge. This woman who had to set things right for God, because there was not a man that would, or you might even say could do it. Now, let me go to chapter 5 as I finish this up now, because there's something really unique here, because there's the Song of Deborah. And chapter 5 verse 1 said, "And on that day Deborah and Barak son of Abinoam sang this song." So there is a song that they sang. They put together, they composed, or somebody did, and they sang that song. And that song, you probably have a national anthem here. I'm sure for your country, most people know. This was what the 12 tribes did for till at least King Solomon's time, when Asaph started writing songs. This is their banner. They would sing this. They would sing this story. And it says in verse 5, Israel's leaders took charge, and the people gladly followed. Praise the Lord! Listen, you kings, pay attention, you mighty rulers, for I will sing to the Lord. I will make music to the Lord, the God of Israel. And it tells a story. And in verse 6 it says that in those days people avoided the main roads. Do you remember this story right here? Okay, remember the main roads? The way of the sea was main. People avoided it. And travelers stayed on winding pathways through the mountains that took forever. There were few people left in the villages of Israel until Deborah arose as a mother of Israel. And then in verse 8, yet not a shield or spear could be seen among 40,000 warriors of Israel. So they could have put together 40,000, not 10,000, 40,000, they still wouldn't have had a spear. My heart is with the commanders of Israel and with those who volunteered for the war. Down in verse 13, down from Tabor marched the few against the nobles. The people of the Lord marched against mighty warriors. They were warriors from birth. They were trained to be their warriors. Against what? Farmers? You better make sure you got the Lord on your side. And they did. But look what's interesting here. In verse 15, the princes of Issachar were with David and Barak. Okay, that's good. We didn't know about them, did we? And they followed Barak, rushing into the valley. But the tribe of Reuben, look over Reuben. There was great indecision. Reuben's going, no, not gonna go. Down in verse 16, yes, the tribe of Reuben, there was great indecision. Gilead or Gad in verse 13 remained east of the Jordan. No, I think we'll let you guys do this. And why did Dan stay at home? Asher sat unmoved at the seashore, remaining in the harbors. But Zebulun risked his life, as did Naphtali, on the heights of the battlefield. You had those that, I mean, they were freeing all the tribes, but the tribes didn't come out. They kind of, what about us? When trials come, do we just like retreat, oh, woe is me, or do we look at them and go, I got God on my side? Okay? Come on. Bring it on, Satan. Bring it on. I've got God. I'm not battling you by myself. Now, it's easy to say for us, but it's easier when, I mean, it's a little harder sometimes when you see a physical army standing there ready to take you out. Verse 20, the stars fought from heaven, the stars in their orbits fought against Sisera. What's he talking about? Well, stars many times have been related to angels. So did God send his angels down and go, okay, why don't you take care of some of this for us? Or was it talking about just the sky? Because it said in verse 21, the Kishon River swept them away. That ancient torrent, the Kishon. March on with courage, my soul. Then the horse's hoofs hammered the ground, and the galloping of Sisera's mighty steeds, as they were just washed away. And then we come down to verse 25, because I think it tells us that this. Why did God want them to wipe them out? So they wouldn't have to contend with them. So God could raise the holy seed in the Holy Land, is what he wanted. In verse 25, Sisera asked for milk, and she gave him, asked for water, and she gave him milk. In a bowl fit for noble, she brought him yogurt. She brought him a nice meal. She was treating him like he thought he should be treated. Then with her left hand she reached for a tent peg, and with her right hand for the workman's hammer. She struck Sisera with a hammer, crushing his head. With a shattering blow she pierced his temples. He sank, he fell, and he died. And then we get an insight. From the window, Sisera's mother looked out. Through the window she watched for his return. Why is his chariot so long in coming? Why don't we hear the sound of chariot wheels? As it gives you this picture of this woman, his mother, sitting by a window. Oh, my son, Sisera. Oh, I miss my son. You know, I miss that chariot coming through. Where is he? And you kind of can begin to go, well, you know what, that's sad because of his mother. You know, I mean, it's his son, and she's wondering where he's at. Oh, really? Let's go down. Verse 29, her wise women answered, and she repeats these words to herself. They must be dividing the captured plunder. With a woman or two for every man. Oh, look at this. Yeah, let them go down and rob all those people. Let's take their women. Let's rape and pillage. Ah, that's my son. There will be colorful robes for Sisera, and colorful embroidered robes for me. For me. Kind of think of where Sisera might have got his viciousness. Yes, the plunder will include colorful robes embroidered on both sides. Lord, may all your enemies die like Sisera, but may those who love you rise like the sun in all of his power. And then there was peace in the land for 40 years. Was she God's Wonder Woman? You read this story, you know what this went through. You see how she led this incredible army. And you see how God gave them victory. And gave him victory because of her. And she truly was God's Wonder Woman.